Hey there, welcome back to the TechCultures channel. In this one, I want to go over how using AI agents for coding makes you a bad software engineer. The funny thing is that the last video I did the exact opposite thing. I went over all of the things that you actually learn by doing agentic coding, but in this one, I want to focus on the negative sides, the things that actually will turn you into a bad software engineer if you are not careful when using AI agents for coding. The first thing is that LLMs have become better at syntax, but not necessarily logic. This means that you're going to see your code either compiling or running correctly at runtime, but if you're not careful, the AI agent is going to introduce a lot of bugs that are very hard to catch, especially because you're not doing things by hand, you're not actually taking a look at the entire code base, understanding everything, and even if you are sort of like doing the writing spec side of things and you are reviewing the code, you're still going to have a tough time understanding where the subtle bugs are introduced into the code base, and that is going to compound, especially because of how fast you can expand or grow a code base when it comes to the number of lines. So the point here is that you probably noticed that tools like Claude Code, let's maybe specify here the models, Opus 4.5 and GPT 5.2 Codex, are models that do not make the kind of silly mistakes that they usually used to make, and that would lead to the code not even running in the first place, or like very basic mistakes that they usually would do. They don't happen anymore. And I think that companies like Anthropic, OpenAI and other open source models were able to sort of remove those mistakes from the LLM, teach it how to go into a more correct direction when it comes to the syntax and these very basic mistakes. But the logic itself, the reasons behind doing something, is very hard to teach a model how to do, and I don't think that they figured that out yet. So this is something that makes you think, okay, the LLM is actually doing something correct. The LLM is writing code that seems very correct. The LLM is not making syntax errors. It is not like invoking function names that don't exist or using properties that don't exist, for example, in a JavaScript object, but they still do a lot of mistakes when it comes to the logic, and those are very hard to catch because you don't have like a big red warning, like a sign that says error. This property doesn't exist, this function doesn't exist, and because of that, you need to actually pay a lot of attention, and it is next to impossible, I would say, if you purely do agentic coding inside of a code base to be able to catch these mistakes. Next, we have the fact that hallucinations still happen, but they are simply more subtle. So this ties into the previous point. Hallucinations still happen, but instead of the model sort of making up something that is very clearly not true, it makes up things in a more, again, subtle way, where we're reading the output from the LLM and we think, yeah, actually this sounds very compelling, it sounds true, it sort of like convinces you that it is completely true, and it doesn't necessarily like make up facts to the point that it is clear, okay, this thing is just making things up. So it doesn't tend anymore to like make up package names. For example, you're using npm, you want to install something, it doesn't make up the name of the package, doesn't make up like syntax inside a particular language, and all of these things are good improvements when it comes to these large language models, but the hallucinations still happen on a more subtle way when it comes to like just ways of doing things. So one thing that I've noticed is that when I ask what is a good pattern for implementing this within this technology, within this framework, a couple of weeks ago I was working with 10stack Start, and I asked it to implement something in the more, I would say, recommended way of doing things with 10stack Start, and it just made up things. So those patterns were nowhere to be found inside the documentation, inside other code bases when I went and did my own quote-unquote manual research, and I realized that the model was essentially making things up. Now, obviously, it's not going to make up an entire framework that doesn't exist, but that still can buy bite us later if we're not careful, especially because, again, they are subtle. This means that we need to pay extra attention. And sometimes I would even prefer if it just like said, okay, I have this framework that I want you to try, and the framework just doesn't exist. I can confirm that very quickly instead of these hallucinations that it generates or creates in its output. If you want to learn more about using AI agents for software engineering, go to techwithtourist.com/AI. I'll be releasing a live training class next month on how to do AI-driven development. If you're a vibe coder, this is not for you. Instead, it's all about building systems and code bases that help you scale AI agents for software engineering. We'll focus on how to plan, execute, and verify, and how this loop creates an environment that leads to AI agents writing code and features exactly how you want, instead of just hoping for the best. Again, go to techwithtourist.com/AI to save your spot for next month. Okay, so the first 2 points were essentially about how LLMs are very clever, quote unquote, and not really clever, but they have this tendency to not necessarily create the best solutions when it comes to logic and then also make up things. This is something that is going to make you a bad software engineer because you're going to have the tendency to follow what it does or to accept what it does, and then you're like slowly going to deteriorate your ability to actually do these things, to think about the logic, to know what good logic even is in the first place, and to be able to know, okay, this is a way that things should be done, and not necessarily like follow the AI agents. And if you just follow what they say and take it at face value, you're going to become a bad software engineer. Now, this next point is something separate from this, where if you're writing code manually, it forces you to think about it. This is something that I've noticed recently when I started working with AI agents more and more, that if I don't go into the code base and actually implement things, it is very hard for me to understand each decision that happened inside of the code base. Obviously, not writing code and just reviewing code is something that always happened, but there was a person writing the code that you were managing or that you were reviewing the code of that particular person. And I think if we allow the LLM to write the code and we only review the code, it's going to be very hard for us to understand, and not writing code manually is going to lead to us essentially losing our skills. That's what I want to say essentially. If you just rely on the LLM, you're going to have like this overview of what it's doing. You're going to see the lines that it introduced on a particular commit. You're going to see the line that it changed, that it removed, but to understand exactly why it did those things, it is very hard unless you're the one actually doing those things. And like I said, if the process was a human writes the code, then you review, you have a lot more certainty that the human did the right thing, that the human thought about those things. Obviously, there are bad engineers, there are junior engineers, but in general, we could rely on the fact that, okay, it's not going to make things up, it's not going to implement patterns that we don't want to implement, that we've specified inside of our documentation that we don't want to implement. With the LLMs, with these AI agents, that is simply not the case. You need to be extra careful, and this in a way also ties into the first point. I would say that the LLM is going to produce code that looks good, looks like a good implementation, but if you don't I should say actually understand how the code base works, you're going to very easily be mistaken and say, okay, yeah, this looks very good, when in fact all of the code base is just a mess, spaghetti code all over the place, and it's just going to result in very bad like code, very bad products, software in general. And my last point is actually pretty close to the previous one. Reviewing code detaches you from what's going on. This is essentially what I just said. If you only review the code, it detaches you from what's going on, which is fine, again, if the person that is writing the code in the first place is a human, is a person. If it is done by an LLM, it means that we don't have any person in that loop actually understanding fully what's happening inside of the code base, which again, it's going to lead to very bad results, maybe not on the short term, but on the long term for sure. And the main reason I think a lot of people are ignoring these problems with AI agents is because of the hype. There's this claim going around on X or Twitter that the AI agents crossed a threshold in December 2025, around the time that Opus 4.5 was released. And it is true that they crossed a threshold, but I think that it was only in terms of hype. They fundamentally didn't change. The models are the exact same thing. They're maybe a little bit better here and there, but the way they work, the like errors or mistakes that they make us do, the bad things that they lead us to when it comes to software, fundamentally that didn't change at all. And because people were on vacation, people were on holidays, and they were able to play around with these tools, and a lot of posts were going around of, my god, this is the best thing ever, you can just do anything that you want with this, software engineering is dead, we don't need programmers anymore. All of these just ridiculous claims that are simply not true. Again, I just did a video. The previous video was on how AI agents make you a better developer. I'm saying this because I don't think this is a black or white situation. This is something that requires us to think about it, approach this with a little bit of nuance, and notice that, okay, it is not, I'm never going to use AI agents for anything at all. And it's also not, I'm only going to use AI agents and I'm not even going to look at the code. And this, funnily enough, ties into my final point, which is the creator of Claudebot or Maltbot. The tool was renamed recently. He is someone that publishes or posts a lot of things on Twitter X. And he even said that he doesn't look at the code anymore. He said that he relies on GPT 5.2 codex and he prefers that model. I agree with that part, to be honest, but he says that he barely even looks at the code anymore, and that 95% of the time, something like that, I think that's something that he actually said on a recent interview, he doesn't even look at the code, he just relies on the fact that the LLM is for sure correct, the LLM knows what it's doing. So I'm going to show you here the website that I took a look at by just pure coincidence this afternoon, and show you just how bad the performance of the website is. And this, I mean, I think it already speaks for itself. I'm not trying to bash this person personally, not trying to like attack him in any kind of way, but the claims that he makes on these platforms, especially on X Twitter, which is where I see his posts all of the time, are simply claims that are not true. It is not true that you can rely on the LLMs and not look at the code. I think this is going to lead to people trying to do that in their workplace and not having a good time at all, and it's going to lead to a lot of poor software in the end. So let's give it a try. The domain name is still claude.bot, and just for comparison, I'm going to show you the GPU usage. As it is now, without any website open, it is at around 40% because I'm using OBS to record this video. For this comparison to be fair, I'm first going to navigate to the UV documentation, which is something I was working on, and I'm going to scroll here a little bit through the documentation, and then we can take a look again at the CPU usage. It is around 46%. It goes down to 40% and it stays around there. Now I've opened the Moltbot website and I'm going to click view all. I'm going to scroll through these cards, which are simply cards that have images and text on them. Nothing too complex at all. And now if I open this, as you can see, the GPU usage is at 99%, which I think is pretty terrible when it comes to building a website. So we have tools like Astro that allow us to build very performant websites. We have frameworks that help us and basically guide us through the process of building performant websites. And this software engineer that says he doesn't look at code anymore produces this kind of software where if I open this inside of my browser, my GPU usage spikes to 100%. And mind you, this is not necessarily a bad laptop at all. This is a M1 Max, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and I'm not really sure the amount of like GPU cores. Honestly, I cannot even remember that, but it is not a bad laptop by any means, and it still is able to spike the GPU usage to 100% by opening a website with cards. Just that has cards, has nothing else at all, like an image maybe as the background and some nice colors, some nice gradients, but that's it. And yeah, it is using almost 100% of the GPU. Again, I'm going to close this, and after closing the website, coming back to the terminal, I'm going to open again this, and goes back to around 40%, 30%, around that number, because again, I'm using OBS. So this is an example, I think, of how relying on AI agents for coding will make you a bad software engineer, because you're going to be led to believe that the outputs, because they look better, because they seem to be better, they are actually better, which is a lot of the times not the case. And I'm going to say this for the last time during this video, because I think it is very important. I'm not saying that you should not use AI agents. I'm simply saying that this hype that is going around of you can do anything with these LLMs, you can just trust their output. They are so good now that they can code better than most developers. We don't need software engineers anymore. You can just rely on the fact that the code is good most of the time and you don't need to check it. Those things are simply not true, and we're going to hurt ourselves as software engineers if we take that at face value, instead of using these tools for what they are good at and not using them when they are not useful at all, like relying on them to do 100% of our work. So this is it. I hope this video is helpful to you, and I'll see you on the next one.